Hi, my name is Gary Mishuris. I'm the Chief Investment Officer and Managing Partner of Silver Ring Value Partners. In this video, I'm going to talk about the first part of my investment process that I described in the owner's manual, and that's idea generation. So idea generation really, comes down to how do you start with a wide universe and end up with a few things that you're going to really investigate in depth, and then also where are those ideas coming from, what are the sources. So let's start at the beginning. So as far as the way my idea generation funnel works, I think it's really important to have a very wide top of the funnel. So in the first step of the three-step funnel, if anything potentially qualifies even at all, it comes into the top of the funnel. The second step is actually a very important step, and that's where I eliminate ideas from that initial list. The idea here is that many of those ideas made it, but maybe they don't really qualify on further inspection. So you don't want to spend a ton of time doing research on something that's not that promising. So in the second step, you're looking to kill an idea, you're looking to eliminate it so that you don't waste time pursuing ideas that you would not invest in anyway. Finally, after the first two steps, in the third step, you get a small set of companies. Usually for me, it's about a dozen. And in that dozen or so, that's where you kind of want to spend maybe a couple of hours each. Maybe it is reading a transcript or reading an annual report, getting a better sense of the business to narrow it down to the final two or three that I'm going to be working on in each cycle. So those are the three steps. So number one is you're going to include a lot of things that are potentially interesting. Step number two, you're going to eliminate as many as possible if they don't meet any of the criteria that you must have criteria. And the final step, step three, is where you're prioritizing them to find the most promising candidates to actually do the more in-depth work on. Now let's talk about how we're going to actually generate ideas. What are the sources? So I really believe it's important not to have what I call a monoculture of idea generation. So what would be a monoculture? Let's say you just do a screen and all your ideas come from that quantitative screen. That's fine, but I think there's a good chance that you're missing a lot of things if that's all you look at. So what I do is I have four different sources for ideas. The first source is what I call my high-quality watch list. It's really a group of companies that numbers a few hundred that I've identified as good companies, good businesses that I watch. They're not necessarily inexpensive at the time I add them to the list, but they're good businesses and I know they're good, and I'm waiting for some price dislocation, some potential situation where now maybe they might become undervalued. So every time I do this idea generation process, I go to my inventory of these high quality businesses and I check if there have been any large price drops or if any of them look cheap now or anything going on with that watch list in order to determine if any of those companies are potentially actionable at this new price. So that's the first source. The next source is value screening. And I talked about screening being, one potential source. You definitely don't want to have it be your only source, but it's a very quick and efficient way to cover the whole universe. So for me, I am a big fan of looking at free cash flow over time as the metric to screen on. So typically what I do is I have a 7-year average of free cash flow for a company, and I look at what I call the free cash flow yield based on that. So take that 7-year average of free cash flow and divide it in the current market cap of the company to get an idea of the current free cash flow yield. And that gives you a measure of how cheap is this company right now. And also you have a quality metric that I don't require that it's a great business, but I want it to be at least a decent business. So I typically only look at companies that earn their cost of capital over a full cycle. So typically maybe a return on invested capital of 8 or 9% or better over a 7 to 10 year period. So that's value screening. It's a quick way to look at a wide universe, and that's the second source of idea generation. Third, there are special situations. And again, sometimes people say, all my companies are special. But here what I mean is companies that might not screen well for specific reasons, but where there is either forced selling or neglect. And those are two patterns that are typically helpful to have the security mispriced in the markets. So an example might be spin-offs. So a larger company spinning off a smaller company that's then might be sold by the holders of the original company because they don't want to hold it regardless of price. It might be a post-bankruptcy situation where a company went through a Chapter 11 reorganization and now it's coming out with a clean balance sheet, but people are just not focusing on that. People have forgotten about it. It might be a recapitalization. It might be a turnaround. These are the examples of special situations, and they usually complement screening well because typically they don't screen quite as well purely on financial metrics. And finally, I do think it's important to source some of your ideas from a network of like-minded investors. So I have a large network of other value investors that I respect who share similar philosophy, even if their specific process of how they implement that philosophy might be somewhat different from mine. And in talking with them, frequently ideas come up that they're excited about. Now, that doesn't mean that I go ahead and buy something that someone else likes just because they like it. What it does mean is it goes into that first step in the funnel, the top of the funnel, for further examination based on my own criteria and my own process. So those are the four sources of idea generation. And if I were to recap, I think idea generation, it's important to have a look at the wide universe. You want to look at it in ways that are complementary to each other, so you don't have blind spots where you're missing potential ideas. And for me, the funnel has 3 steps. The top of the funnel where things come in quite easily. If they at all potentially likely to be interesting, they go in. The second step, which is what I call the kill step, where I try to eliminate the companies as quickly as possible to save me time on things that I'm not going to work on anyway. And then finally, step 3, the prioritization step, where I try to decide which companies, after further research, the most promising and the most potentially actionable right now that I'm going to work on 2 or 3 at a time. So that's the funnel. And then the 4 sources of ideas that we talked about are, you have the high quality companies watch list. That's the first source. The second source is value screening. The third source is special situations. And finally, the 4th source is sourcing ideas from a network of other value investors. So that's the idea generation process I use at Silver Ring Value Partners, and I think that it's quite effective, and as long as you're consistent and rigorous and use in a repeatable fashion, it does a great job of surfacing the right potential ideas to work on further.